All right, what's up, everybody? We just got to Lake Conroe, getting ready to start stage one. Very excited about this season because I get to talk to you about going back to some basics, some bass fishing that we kind of skipped last year. Everyone was shaking a minnow. That's still going to happen a little bit in the Bass Pro Tour, but just to remind everybody where we landed this year as far as like how to restrict all that stuff. We can only use our active target for one period, and we have to declare that before we start the period. And we have for 2/3 of the day, the other two periods, we have to fish without it. Back to traditional bass fishing. So I love that because I like using my active target, but I don't feel like we should be using it 100% of the time, and I don't feel like a guy should only be dependent on it. He needs to get out there and fish, be able to catch them every single way. If we're going to crown an Angler of the Year winner at the end of the year, you need to be versatile to earn that title, as far as I'm concerned. And there's guys that only use forward-facing sonar, and so I ordered some rods from Ark, and I wanted to go over just fishing rods, not forward facing stuff, and talk to you why I use these rods. I had them ship me these rods over here to Lake Conroe, so luckily they made it. And this is Ark's high end stuff. This is the Reinforcer Series from Ark. This is their most expensive rod, and this is the G8 reel. This is their most expensive reel. Now I get it. Not everyone can go out and buy the most expensive stuff, but they have a category for everyone. The three rods that I've used since I've been on with Ark last year was the Randall Tharp series, which is a phenomenal series. I liked every single rod I put in my hand. And then the Invoker Tour series, which is a really good. It's very close to this as far as feel and weight, but it's cheaper, better price point for most people. So if you're gonna go buy a bunch of Ark rods, you might want to look at the Invoker series or the Tharp series. But if you want some specialty rods, this Reinforcer series, to me, when I'm fishing for 6 straight days in a tournament, or practice in the tournament and everything, if I make it through the whole tournament, that's a lot of fishing. And I start getting inflammation in my arm. I start getting cramps when I'm jerking a lot, when I'm flipping a lot, punching, swimming a jig. Those things cause fatigue as the week goes on. We are human, and even I can remember whenever I was in my early 20s, I felt these same pains. But what I did notice, the one way to mitigate them is when you put the rod and reels in your hand that are balanced, lightweight, sensitive, so you're not overworked. You don't realize how much an ounce or two or three in a setup can add to your arm and your fatigue throughout the week. So you're going to get the lightest, most balanced system out of this Reinforcer series with the G8 reel. That is the high-end stuff. You're going to pay for it, but it's worth it to me if you're going to get a couple setups like this, whatever you think you're going to do the most. So 3 rods that I feel like if you're going to pick 3, this is a 7-1 medium, and then the 7-1 medium heavy, and then the 7-1 heavy. So these 3 rods right here, you can get after it. You can pound the bank with it and fish all week long and attack stuff. So let's go over each one and why I ordered it in the gear ratio reel. So the G8 is, to me, the premium reel. You can make this reel. You can set it to where it's impossible to backlash. You can put this reel in your wife's hand, your kid's hand. They can cast it. Learn how to throw a bait caster. It's that easy to cast. I love it because I can throw light baits into the wind and it won't backlash. So the medium, I like using the medium instead of those big glass cranking rods that's a trend that everybody likes using. When I'm whipping around small crankbaits, pre-spawn, wintertime cranking, flat sides, little Nomad Atlas square bills, little DT6s, all those popular pre-spawn crankbaits. I love spooling it up with some 10 and 12 pound line, putting on a 7-1 medium, this setup right here, and it's so lightweight I can whip it around. It has just the right action in it to where I can load up on a fish and I can handle any size fish, because you don't know if you're going to catch a 2-pounder or 8-pounder going into February on a place like Lake Conroe. But this setup right here is very nice to just one hand whip it. We're getting a lot of times you're getting a lot of backwaters, you're getting in tight areas. I don't like those short handle, bulky, heavy cranking rods for those light baits, because first of all, it wears you out. You can't feel the bait very well, and it's not as fun to fish with. So that's why I like the 7-1 medium, and that's pretty much what I do the most with it. Of course, as you get into the summertime and stuff like that, there's nothing better to throw your walking topwater baits, your spooks and things like that. I love throwing that on this rod as well. Then this is the heavy. This is a 7-1 heavy, and I put that pretty much every setup I use 90% of the time is an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel. The only time I don't use an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel if the bait has a bunch of drag on it and I feel like the 8-to-1's just hurting me. Then I'll step down to a 7-to-1. So I got 5 7-to-1s here and 5 8-to-1s here. These 7-to-1s I like to use for my spinner baits, my double Colorados, my willows, any kind of spinner bait. And then if I'm getting into some crankbaits that have a little bit bigger bill on them, like a little bit deeper diving crankbaits, I'll get into 7-to-1s. And I'll even step down in the 6 range when I get into the real big crankbaits, like a 6-8 or something like that. But for the most part, I'm 8-to-1. I like to have the speed there. So my flipping, frogging, swim jigging, top water baits, jerk baits, 8-to-1 across the board. Even my flat-sided balsa, I'm 8-to-1, and I just slow it down with my hand. But when that fish eats it, I want to be able to catch up to it. I like to have the control. So the 7-1 heavy, this is a powerhouse to me. I love flipping, frogging, swim jigging with this one. This is a major rod for me, going from pre-spawn all through the season, really. But I love swimming a jig. Everybody knows that. We just came out with a new heavy cover signature swim jig from Nomad, and that thing got a hook on it. It's a meat hook. I could put 50-pound braid on this. I could skip a half-ounce white swim jig with a big hook in it, and any cover, any brush, anything. And this is the rod that I like to do that, what they call the Alabama shake. And you're going to shake a swim jig like this all day. That's where this balance comes into play. I love the sensitivity, especially flipping and everything. A lot of times when I'm flipping bushes, I never swap hands, and I'll make a lot of flips like this. And the reason I like a 7-to-1, if I can get away with it versus a 7-6 or a 7-11, is because I have a shorter distance to move the rod tip to set the hook. I don't like a really long rod if I don't need it. Sometimes you need a big rod to handle the weight that you put on the end. That's the only time I ever up the rod, is to compensate for the size of the weight. But anything half ounce and below, the 7-1 reinforcer is a machine. It doesn't wear me out. A lot of times, if I put a heavy weight and a big rod in my hand, I start getting that tennis elbow and the fatigue. And when you flip from daylight to dark for a whole week, I don't care who you are. You can be a professional baseball player, and your arm's going to start hurting you. So this rod right here, I love it. I can get back in marinas. I can get behind trees. It's short, and when a fish bites it, I have plenty of power. To me, it's the absolute perfect setup for flipping anything half ounce or below. And then, of course, swimming a jig. I'm always skipping a jig behind trees and skipping it underneath docks. A lot of skipping going on, and that's whenever I like that length of a rod. And then, of course, I'm moving the rod a lot. And then a frog, of course. If you're just, a lot of times in the winter, or as those fish are just getting up there to spawn, there's not overgrown giant mats of vegetation. Everything's sparse and dead, and so you don't need a giant rod like if you was in the middle of the summer uh, on Gunnersville or down in Florida, and you was catching them out of those big cheese mats where when those fish eat it and he gets buried in there, yeah, you want basically the biggest rod you can get to get those fish out of that stuff. But we do a lot of frog fishing early in the year when things are dead. I call it open water frog fishing. You don't need a giant rod. You will enjoy your frog day much more if you put a 7-1 heavy in your hand with an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel with some 50-pound Seaguar braid, and just go put the frog, focus on the cast, put the frog in those really hard to cast places and get that bite, and you'll realize that this is all the rod you need for that, and it makes it way more enjoyable. So the heavy, anything half ounce and below, and for flipping and swim jigging and frogging, this is this rod's a big deal. And then we get into the medium heavy. So the medium heavy is very versatile. You can even flip with this if you're going to get into flipping real light stuff. Like if you want to put on like some 17-pound Seaguar Tatsu and flip around a little bitty jig, or flip a D-bomb on a 1/4 ounce weight, things that we do in the pre-spawn spawn. I like to downsize my line a little bit and not overpower the line with the heavy action rod, because you might break him off. So the medium, you can flip with it when you want to downsize that line and get into those lighter baits. But the number one thing that you could do with this 7-1 medium heavy, and probably has been the most productive bait over the last 10 years, especially this time of the year, is put a bladed jig in your hand. There's another big misconception on bladed jig rods. Everyone wants this big parabolic, soft, heavy, goofy rod, and they feel like they'll land more fish. Well, I've tested it all, and I think that's a bunch of garbage to me. You put a 7-1 medium heavy in your hand, and you put on some 17-pound Tatsu, and you put a half-ounce bladed jig in your hand, because a lot of times we're making these casts in short range, 20 feet from the boat, and we're skipping it around trees, skipping it under docks. Well, what happens is when that fish bites it, and you want to swing on him, if that rod's so parabolic, you can't even get a hook in that fish. And so the first time he jumps, he's got that big head of that bladed jig, and he throws it, and you lose him. And I've had it on video before with those really soft rods where I'll set the hook on the fish, and I didn't feel like I did anything when I swung the rod. So you'll see me start walking back in the boat. I'm still trying to drive that hook. And in those situations, I've lost those fish. And I realized that anytime I'm fishing short range targets with a bladed jig, you can't beat a 7-1 medium heavy. You can even go to a heavy if you really, really want to hit them like a swim jig. Whenever you feel them eat that thing, hit them, and I'll punch that hook right through their snout, and my landing percentage went up tremendously. So my favorite setup for fishing targets with a bladed jig is this 7-1 medium heavy and an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel, and I can just put it in my hand and go. Same thing with the swim jig. You can put the swim jig, the flipping stick, and a bladed jig in my hand, and I can cover this whole lake and probably have a phenomenal tournament with just those 3 rods. So that's my main 3 setups that I ordered from Ark. I want to make sure I had plenty of those, because I'm going to be doing a lot of that this week. Just getting back to the basics, frogging, flipping, swim jigging, throwing around little crankbaits and stuff like that. That is typical pre-spawn winter stuff, and it'll work all over the country. But I cannot stress to you enough, if you can go out and buy one of these high-end Ark rods, treat yourself, especially if you know it's going to be one that you lock in your hand 90% of the day. If you're that guy that just says, man, I'm going to go there and just throw a chatterbait all day, or I'm going to flip a lot, get the G8 reel. The G8 reel for flipping is phenomenal because it doesn't backlash. So you can sit there and skip it and flip it, and you're not constantly trying to pick out the loose loops in it and stuff. It just the spool stays nice and compact all the time. And a lot of times people don't realize when you backlash your reel how much damage you do to your fluorocarbon. And then you set the hook and break a fish off, or you'll cast it and all of a sudden your line just comes off your reel, and that's because you're backlashing. So to protect your line, you want a reel that doesn't backlash, and the G8 is the easiest casting reel I ever put in my hand. But just wanted to take a second and tell everybody why I ordered more of these 3 size rods right here. Is because we're not shaking a minnow. You can't get by just shaking a minnow this season on the Bass Pro Tour. We're back to sitting there doing it old school, and I'm a specialist at this kind of stuff, and this is how I've always done it. And these are the nicest setups I've ever had in my hand for attacking the water in that way. And I just really felt like it was very important to tell people, hey, look, if you're tired of shaking a minnow and you want to pick up those tools again, check out the Reinforcer rods from Ark, because I'm telling you, you'll love them.